All right, so I'm going to show you guys how to make the Upstate pattern. It's a little confusing, so I wanted to talk you through it. My first step was to get my pattern sizes. I really would recommend making more large rather than small because I found that the small ones were very small and I don't think they would fit most people. So I would encourage you to kind of stick with the large pattern. You can either print it out or trace it like I did. On that pattern, they give us a nice 2-inch measurement that we can kind of check the scale with an actual ruler to make sure that it printed out to the right size. So step number 1 is to get your patterns and cut them out. And then your next step is to cut out your lining and your main fabric. So for my lining, you can use anything. You can use 100% cotton, you can use flannel, whatever you have around. This one here is a knit. I wouldn't recommend that, but this is what I'm using as my example. And then for the outside, you're going to do 100% cotton. I have this nice striped pattern. When you cut this one out, you need 2 of each. It's really important when you do your main piece of fabric that you are mirroring them. So if you look at my front pieces, they're not going in the same direction. That's why I like to fold it when I cut it. So that I know that it does that mirroring for me and I don't have to worry about flipping my pattern piece over. So I have 2 of these and I have 2 of my lining and I am ready to sew. So step number 1 is we are going to sew right along this curve here. We're going to sew the right sides together, meaning the 2 colored sides that go together. When I'm doing this, I did not use a tracing wheel like the pattern recommends. I don't think that step's necessary. If you have one and you want to do that, that's fine. But I'm just using the width of my presser foot as an idea. It's about a 1/4 inch is usually kind of what I stick with. All right, so I'm gonna start on there. Again, you're just gonna do that nice round piece. Make sure you do a back stitch and to lock it into place. So I've done this one, and then I'm going to do the same exact thing with my lining pieces. Okay, so I have my 2 rounded edges. That's our first step. And the next thing I'm going to do is just using a little pair of scissors, I'm going to clip that curve because it's a curve. If we don't give it a couple of clips, it's not going to lay nicely. So when you clip, just do a couple little lines, making sure you're not cutting up through that stitch you just made. Just giving it some room to move. Okay, so it'll end up looking like that. So you're going to do that for both. Okay, so now that I've done that, I'm going to put my right sides together again. So this is my right side of this fabric, and then I know the right side of my lining fabric, there's no pattern on it, but the side that doesn't have the seam, that's what I want to look at. All right, so I know this is my right side because it's nice and smooth. I'm going to, again, put my right sides together. So I'm going to line my seams up right at the top. For this step, I like to, it's a little hard to see, I like to take a pin and stick it through my first seam, straight across to my next seam to make sure they're lined up. And then I'll do it down at the bottom too. If you kind of drape it over your fingers, that also kind of helps line it up. However, you can get those 2 middle pieces lined up. On the pattern, it also says to reinforce that with to go and press it and to reinforce it with a top stitch on the top of it. I, again, did not do that. Kind of taking the lazy way out, but also I don't think that step is necessary and might just give more confusion. All right. All right, so I have my lining pinned on here. My next step is to sew those right sides together again. So when I line this up, I'm gonna line my lining up right up to the top of my original piece. And I'm just going to sew those down. Point I can take that needle out because I don't need it there. Make sure the rest of my fabric is lined up. Now I tend to line it up as I go. If you are not that type of person, you are welcome to pin all this down so it's in place. I don't mind stopping and readjusting, but that's just me. So what I just did is I sewed my right sides together along my nose piece there. And then this is the most important step. This is where I struggled my first time. Instead of just sewing this down where it is and leaving that bottom, I'm gonna pull the bottoms so that they line up. So what that looks like is I'm probably gonna pull that pin out. I'm going to match up my seams again on the very bottom. So the two fabrics are in line. Again, I'm gonna pin right through those seams just so the middle stays in the middle. And then again, I'm going to take this and pull it nice right up to the edge. So it will curl in a little bit. That's okay, it'll give us a nice border effect once we go and press this. So now I'm just gonna sew the bottom seams. Again, my two pieces are lined up together, my right sides are still together. So at this point, you can see it's pulling down a little bit. It's not exactly flat against my fabric, but that's okay. At this point, we're gonna wanna go into this little pocket we made and just flip it so that the right sides are out and all of those seams we made are hidden inside. Okay. Now that I have this, my next step would be to iron this. So when I iron it, it's gonna make a nice little folded over edge. At this point, we do want everything nice and flat. I'll show you how I go about ironing it. Would have helped if I plugged in my iron. All right. So when I iron this, what I have been tending to do is I'm using this nice little curved part. If you have a pressing ham, this is a great time for that. I unfortunately don't have one at home here. So I'm just using the edge of my ironing board. It's not perfect, but it works. I'm pushing this middle seam right up against there, and I'm using my ironing board to hold that shape and press down. So if I line this up here, you can see it already starts to do it. It gives us this nice little folded over piece of our original fabric. That's what's gonna maintain your size of the fabric to keep it the size that they're asking for. And it also gives it a really nice look. So I'm gonna give it a couple seconds for my iron to heat up, and then I'll press this out for you guys. So then I'm just flipping the corner I just did. So now I'm gonna do the opposite side. Lay it down as flat as I can get it for now. Use my iron to kind of work it out, make it look the way it should. Once you think you have it good, you can flip it one more time. You can iron the top of it. So again, I like this method of using my tip. Wish I had a pressing hand, but it does help kind of push that corner in and make sure that it stays in place. So we are going to go back over to the sewing machine. This next step is probably the most difficult step. What we're gonna do is we are going to insert the little piece of pipe cleaner that I said about 5 inches into our nose piece there. If you got the nose pieces, I'm not sure what those look like, but I'm sure they're much easier to use than the pipe cleaner. I've been finding with the pipe cleaner, they're kind of moving around when I put them in the mask, so you might want to put a couple extra stitches to hold them in place. But I have broken a needle on this, so you want to make sure it's a metal pipe. You want to make sure that you are staying a good amount away from that. So I like to fold it in half so that I know where the midpoint is. That's a point that I'm going to try to stick right up into this nose piece. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my pocket that I've made. I'm going to slide that in there. Turn it this way so you can see it. So I'm going to slide it into my nose piece. And I'm gonna try to find the middle of that pipe cleaner again. Again, this is probably the trickiest part. Takes a little bit to kind of move it into place. Once you think you have the middle where it needs to go and it's nice and snug up in the top there, hold on to it, don't lose it. Make sure it stays up in the top where it needs to go. So now all I'm going to do is I'm going to set this into my sewing machine. Again, I'm going to use that 1/4 inch. I'm going to sew, making sure that I press my pipe cleaner right up to the tippy top of that area, sewing it into place by doing a top stitch. Again, please make sure you're not sewing over the pipe cleaner and kind of push it out of the way. Make sure it's snug up into the top. Again, the nose pieces might be easier. I haven't seen them. There's probably an easier way to do this, but this is what I've figured out. All right, so I have my pipe cleaner in place. I'm gonna start down here. I would start at the very end of the fabric. Again, about a 1/4 inch. I'm using my fingers always down there to hold it into place. So I have it where I need it. Carefully sending it. If I have to go back into the pocket to move it out a little bit, that's all right. I think I made it around the corner okay. Okay, so the hard part's done. We have a nice top stitch on this side. My nose piece is put into place. Now all I need to do, I've been sewing 1 stitch down the middle. I stitch in the ditch, which means I put my needle right into where the seam is and stitch down there. You don't have to do that, but if you do choose to do it, just make sure you're not sewing up into that casing we just made, because our pipe cleaner's up in there and you'll break your needle. So if you do start that, start at the stitches we just made. Again, I haven't been. I'm just gonna do a top stitch again, right on the edge of the bottom to make sure my mask is nice and sturdy. If this is an area where you wanna, again, make sure the centers are lined up, you can do that, but I think we're pretty good here. The last step is to make our casing for our elastic or strings. I've been using string I made out of t-shirts. I can show you how I did that. I really like the method. I also came up with a way to tie it where it's not going around the nurse's ears and it's also not having too many ties in the back. I really like this method. I think it makes it so the mask is nice and snug against your face, which is very cool. So I'll show you that in a second. Our last step before we get to that, I have been turning in about a 1/4 inch, one little line here, top stitch, and then again I'm going to fold it over one more time and I'm going to sew it to make a nice size pocket there. I'll show you what that looks like, but this pocket is where our string is going to get threaded through. So I'll show you that. Again, I do a 1/4 inch. If you want to press this, you can. I do not like pressing things, so I will not be. All right, so one little casing side done. Do the other casing. Now, again, I'm going to fold this over. I'm going to make sure I catch the lining in this one, and I'm going to make sure I get it big enough so that I can fit my little pulling tool there so that I can pull my string through. If you have a different method, again, you don't have to do this. And last one, again, I'm going to take this and I'm going to fold it over my lining to make a nice little pocket. If you want to measure them, you can do that. Okay. At this point, I normally clip my threads, but I'm not going to do that just yet because I want to show you guys how I string them. But this is what my final sewing of my mask should look like. Like I said, I made string out of t-shirt here. There's lots of tutorials online. Basically, you just fold the t-shirt up and then you cut it going horizontally across it. And then if you want to get really fancy, this is all one continuous length of string that I made by cutting on a diagonal between those horizontal cuts that I made. Like I said, there's a lot of tutorials online. Check that out. I also have this little pulling tool. Traditionally it's used for weaving, but I just happen to have it. So this is the tool that I'm using to thread up through my little pockets that I made. So what I'm going to do, and I'm going to come up through the nose piece. I'm going to stick my string into there, and I just pull that string through. So now I have it like so. Then I'm going to pull it over to the other side. So normally they would either leave it like this and tie it this way, or leave these so they could be used for ties. But like I said, I like this method of keeping it one continuous string. So I'm going to pull it back down through. So in the method I like, it has this looped piece here, and then it has two pieces in the bottom. Once I have that, I just cut this off. I tie a little knot on each end. And then that way it won't come undone, and it looks really nice. And I'll show you what that looks like on. So now this piece goes around my head, this piece comes down over my nose, and I just take my two little strings and I can just tie one knot. I can pull it nice and tight. The piece around my head fits really snug. And then I also have that nose piece there that I can fit around my nose. So that's the mask that we've been working with. That's how I go about it. So I hope that helps.